The moment Karen Miller told me I had 30 days to destroy my great-grandfather's fence, I realized something important. Not about the fence, not even about the HOA, but about the dangerous little moment when a person with a tiny bit of authority suddenly believes they're a king. And Karen, well, she had just declared war on the wrong man. It happened inside the Oakwood Preserve Clubhouse, one of those beige suburban buildings that smells faintly like carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. About 20 residents sat in folding chairs while Karen Miller, HOA president, self-appointed queen of neighborhood aesthetics, sat at the head table like a plastic throne monarch. Her voice came through the cheap microphone, smooth and smug. "The board has voted Mr. Caldwell. Your fence violates Covenant 7.4 subsection B regarding unapproved construction materials. You have 30 days to remove it. Otherwise, the HOA will remove it and bill you for demolition, plus a $10,000 fine." The room went quiet. Now here's the thing about that fence. It wasn't just some backyard project. It was a 4-foot-high, 200-foot-long, dry-stacked stone wall built by my great-grandfather in 1922. He laid those stones himself back when this land was still farmland, and the nearest grocery store required a horse and half a day. But Karen looked at it like it was an eyesore. I stood there quietly while the board members beside her nodded like dashboard bobbleheads. Public humiliation, that's what the meeting was meant to be. And Karen was enjoying every second. My name's Frank Caldwell, Sergeant Major retired U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. For 25 years, I built bridges, airfields, and fortifications in places where the ground itself wanted to kill you. So believe me when I say I understand structures, I understand rules, and more importantly, I understand battlefields. When I retired, I came home to the one place that had always anchored my family. 10 acres of North Carolina woodland passed down for over a century. Quiet land, rolling trees, peace. There was just one catch. To access the main road, a small corner of my property touched a suburban development called Oakwood Preserve. That meant if I wanted utilities and a legal address, I had to join their HOA. I paid the dues, kept to myself. Figured it was a small tax for peace and quiet. That was before Karen Miller took over the board. Karen ran the HOA like a suburban dictatorship. Trash cans out 2 hours early. Violation. Basketball hoop overnight. Violation. Mailbox flag the wrong color. Violation. She drove around the neighborhood in a golf cart like it was a police cruiser. And my stone wall, well, it offended her perfect beige world. I got the first notice a month before that meeting. A form letter saying the fence violated HOA standards. I responded politely, registered mail. Historical photo attached. A picture from 1935 showing my grandfather standing proudly beside that wall. I figured history and logic would settle it. Instead, Karen turned it into a crusade. That meeting ended with her smiling and saying, "You now have 23 days remaining." I left without saying a word. But inside, something had already shifted. The engineer stepped aside, and the strategist stepped in. My wife Sarah saw it immediately. She set a mug of coffee on the dining table, now covered in maps and documents, and asked one simple question. "What's the plan, Frank?" The plan started with reconnaissance. For 2 days straight, I sat in the county records office digging through a century of land deeds. Dusty books, microfilm reels, survey maps. Most people would have quit after a few hours. But in the Corps, you learn something important. If you want to win a fight, you study the terrain. Eventually, I found the master subdivision plat from 1998, the map that created Oakwood Preserve. And when I laid it over my family's original 1920 survey, something didn't line up. Just a slight shift. About 20 feet. At the time, I assumed it was old survey inaccuracies. I ignored it. That was my mistake. A week later, I attended the next HOA meeting armed with a thick binder. Deeds. Photos. Their own bylaws highlighted in yellow. I calmly explained the obvious. The fence was built in 1922. The HOA didn't exist until 1998. Their own charter limited authority to structures built after the HOA was created. Simple, logical, unbeatable. For a moment, I saw uncertainty on the board members' faces. Then Karen tapped the speakerphone. "Mr. Davies, are you there?" Their lawyer's voice filled the room. Smooth, slippery. He claimed that by building my new house on the property, I had re-engaged the land with HOA authority, making every structure subject to their rules. Total nonsense. But to the audience, it sounded official. Karen smiled like she'd already won. "The 30-day clock is still ticking," she said. I left again, but this time the war had truly begun. Outside the meeting, neighbors started talking. Mr. Henderson told me about a fine for a whimsical garden gnome. The Garcias told me their kid's swing set required 6 months of approval. Suddenly I realized something. This wasn't just about my fence. Karen had been terrorizing the entire neighborhood. So I started collecting affidavits, stories, evidence. An insurgency was forming. But I still needed one more thing. Proof. So I hired a professional survey team. GPS equipment accurate down to fractions of an inch. 3 surveyors arrived a week later. 2 young tech guys and an old veteran named Gus, the kind of surveyor who treats boundary lines like sacred scripture. They spent 2 days tracing my property markers. Everything matched the original maps, until they reached the northern edge near the HOA clubhouse. Around noon, I saw Gus walking slowly across the HOA lawn with his metal detector, right toward the putting green beside the pool. He stopped, dug a small hole, then waved me over. I walked across the grass, heart pounding. Inside that hole sat a rusted iron rod, a survey pin, my family's northeast property marker from the 1920s. Gus looked at me pale. "Mr. Caldwell, I have triple-checked the GPS." He pointed behind me, at the clubhouse, at least a third of that building, the deep end of the pool, and both tennis courts. He swallowed. "They're on your land." The world tilted for a moment. 20 years. For 20 years, the HOA clubhouse had been sitting on 1.2 acres of my family's property. Karen thought she was fighting me over a stone wall. What she'd actually done was hand me a nuclear warhead. I called my old friend Dave Jensen, former Army colonel, now a high-powered property lawyer. I emailed him the survey. He was silent for about 10 seconds. Then he whistled. "Frank, this isn't a lawsuit." Pause. "This is a tactical nuclear strike." Our plan had 3 phases. First, we recorded the GPS survey with the county official property lines. Public record. Second, we waited. Karen's demolition deadline kept ticking, and we said nothing. Third, we baited the trap. On the morning the deadline expired, I was sitting on my porch drinking coffee when I heard diesel engines, a bulldozer, an excavator, demolition crew. Right behind them came Karen in her golf cart wearing a bright pink tracksuit like some suburban dictator about to oversee an execution. Neighbors gathered to watch. Karen rolled up smiling. "Mr. Caldwell, since you refuse to comply, the board will now remove the structure and bill you $12,000 plus your $10,000 fine." I ignored her, walked over to the demolition foreman, handed him a thick envelope. Inside was a court injunction cease and desist order and the new survey. The foreman read the first page and shook his head. "Lady, I'm not touching that." Karen snatched the papers. Then she saw the map, the red boundary line slicing straight through the clubhouse, the pool, the tennis courts. Her clipboard slipped out of her hand. For the first time since I'd met her, Karen Miller looked afraid. Right then, Dave pulled up in his black sedan. Perfect suit, perfect timing. He stepped forward and explained calmly, "The HOA has been illegally occupying 1.2 acres of my client's land for 22 years. Neighbors gasped. Dave continued, "Which means every dollar of HOA dues spent maintaining that clubhouse has been improving Mr. Caldwell's private property." Silence. Karen stood frozen. Her empire had collapsed in 30 seconds. A week later, the HOA held an emergency meeting. Packed room. Angry homeowners. Karen tried blaming the developer, the county, anyone but herself. But everyone knew the truth. Her vendetta had uncovered the biggest property mistake in the neighborhood's history. Within days, she was voted out. The new board came to my house. They asked one question: "What will it take to make this right?" My conditions were simple. First, the HOA would buy the land at full commercial value. Second, the stone fence would become a protected historical landmark. Third, the HOA bylaws would be rewritten to eliminate petty aesthetic rules. Fourth, all fines Karen issued would be refunded. Fifth, Karen Miller would resign permanently and never hold HOA power again. They agreed. Every condition. The final meeting felt less like a board meeting and more like a treaty signing. A certified check slid across the table. Enough money to secure my grandchildren's future. Then Karen was called forward. She read a formal apology to the entire community, voice shaking, face pale. When she finished, she walked out of the room and never came back. But the moment that mattered most, it happened weeks later. I woke up to the sound of stone hammers tapping. The HOA had hired master stonemasons to restore my great-grandfather's wall. The same wall Karen tried to destroy, now protected forever. Sometimes I sit on the porch at sunset looking at that wall. It's more than stone. It's a reminder. Power without humility is dangerous. And people who obsess over control usually forget the most important rule in property law. Always check the survey before you start a war. But I'm curious about something. If you were in my position, would you have settled like I did? Or would you have forced them to tear down the entire clubhouse sitting on your land? Let me know what you think. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA that abused its power, share your story too. I'd really like to hear it.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video. Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.